What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to ironinfidel.com. So today we're going to be talking about modern optic height mounts, why it's probably better both for shooting and your physical health and experience out there on the range, and give you a couple of options that don't break the bank because these things can get extremely expensive. But before we get into that, remember to stay healthy and stay hydrated. We got those battle bottles at ironinfidel.com. We got the new dagger and knot blades. Awesome stuff made right here in the United States in Colorado. And all of the fitness gear. We've got new plate carriers and new gear coming, so you can do anything you want out there to stay healthy and stay hydrated at ironinfidel.com. So what do we mean by modern optic mount height? So you can see this example right here. It's obviously quite tall. It's got a little diving board on it, so the extension. So I have my D-ball A3 on there. And there's a lot of positives when it comes to a mount this height. So when I started my career as a young Army Ranger, and then when I got out as a young police officer, taller mounts weren't really a thing yet. So you either had your standard height, which is, basically right on the rail. You had some lower 1/3 stuff, and that started to get good, but the taller stuff was just better because the thing that started to happen when you were just behind the gun for a long time out there training or doing whatever it was, is you either had to really scrunch down with your neck like that to get behind it and get through the optic, where you had to bring your shoulder, contort it way up to bring that optic in line. Now, I know some of the old boys out there will disagree with me, but I never felt that was comfortable. All the way through the early 2000s, it was just not a good scenario, especially if you're taller, have longer neck, longer arms. It seems to be that the lower the optic mount is, the more uncomfortable it is. Now, I will admit things have gotten a little bit crazy with mounts getting like up over 2.5, sometimes even a little bit taller than that on the height, and they have gotten ridiculously expensive. Some of them out there in the market are like 400 and more, which is pretty crazy for a mount. So again, we're going to talk about a couple options today that are a little bit more moderately priced that I've been using for quite some time and perform quite well. Another big reason that people go to the taller mounts is when you're running passive aiming with your night vision. So anytime you're running night vision goggles, they're down over your eyes. It's really tough to get those down into the viewport of the rifle. So having a taller mount on here allows you to see through that much easier with much less pain in your neck and your upper body. And I say that having run passive aiming both ways, both with taller mounts and with lower mounts back in my Ranger days, which I can tell you was not easy trying to get your night vision goggles smashed down on a lowest mount, a true co-witness mount. Just was not a good day out there. So you'll see taller mounts a lot of times with all the operators in the military, SWAT teams, and it's really worked its way down into the general population, which is just kind of how things go when new products emerge into the market. So I guess you could say overall having a taller mount just makes your shooting experience a little bit nicer. So there's no neck crank down, there's no shoulder driving up. You just get to bring the rifle right up into your view and get what would be more of, I guess you could say, a chin weld than a cheek weld. Because the old school positioning in the late 90s, early 2000s, when it came to, operations and CQB and stuff, you were super tight in like this and you were driving this rifle, where now we see things where it's a little bit more stretched out. Your elbow is kind of in an intermediate position and you're just bringing the rifle right up. So we're not quite the 80s SWAT chicken wing, but we're not also that late 90s, early 2000. You got to keep your elbow on your hip or you're going to drag it across the wall. And here's how I kind of think about things. You have a holster on likely with a pistol in it, and that's probably anywhere from 3 to 4 inches off of your hip. Well, that's pretty much a natural stance for most people's elbows, is to be about right there. And if you think about it, when you're in like a typical fighting stance, usually your strong hand is going to be kind of in this position while you're trying to block with your offhand or your weak hand. And that's just a natural response for anybody who has any self-defense skills or any will to live out there. You usually don't see most people do this one. They usually block with their offhand naturally because they want to cock back and push eyeballs through the back of the head with their primary or their strong hand. It's pretty much the same way we are holding rifles these days. It's not all tucked in here. It's not clear out the top. It's, a nice C-clamp grip is what you see most people run these days. And having that taller optic mount just lends itself very nicely to coming up in there. Now, all that being said, there are some drawbacks that obviously we need to pay attention to when it comes to running a 193, a 203, 223, or even some that are taller out there in the market. Let's talk about some of the drawbacks. The first one's going to be anytime we're making something taller or bigger, adding more stuff, that's a little bit more of a snag hazard, whether it's on your personal gear, whether it's on a corner, whether you're coming out of a Bearcat or an MRAP or some kind of vehicle. The more bulk, the more height, generally the more snag hazard. Although it is pretty minimal, you are picking up a little bit of that. The next thing that you really need to pay attention to, and this is super, super important, especially for up close engagements, if you're doing hostage training scenarios, stuff like that, that height over bore, that mechanical height over bore. Now, if you don't know what that is, say you're newer to law enforcement in the military, that mechanical height over bore is the height of the center line of your optic to the center line of the muzzle of your rifle right there. So as you can see on our rifle setup right here, if we put our thumb kind of where the bolt would be right there, that's a pretty decent mechanical offset. Well, what that really means is inside that like 35 and down, even sometimes depending on the height, up to 50 yards, when you are taking that up close and personal shot, you need to appropriately place your dot to ensure that with that mechanical offset, you're going to hit your intended target. Easy way to think about this is if you just hold your gun right up to a target like this, you can see where the muzzle would impact the target as compared to the height of your optic. Now, what that's going to tell you is how high you need to aim. And on most modern targets, you're either going to aim or you're going to place an impact in the eye box or in the soft tissue of the mouth area, somewhere in there. So knowing your mechanical offset, you need to aim that much higher. So it could be 2 inches, 2.5 inches, whatever that offset is, to ensure that proper round placement. So basically, if you put dot to skip across forehead, you're going to hit the eye box when you're running a 2-ish inch mount. The next big drawback when it comes to making things taller and taller really comes into play more so with either magnified optics or magnifiers like 5X plus, and that is going to be off-axis shooting. Now, if you don't know what off-axis is, your axis is straight up and down. That's how you've zeroed your rifle. That round's going to arc in. Now, if you're running an LPVO or something and you got like a 193 or taller, if you are shooting angular or that gun is angled either way, you are changing the trajectory of that round. Effectively, your elevation is becoming slight windage now based on how that rifle is canted or turned. Again, those are things you can know, you can train through, you can make dope cards for that stuff, but that is something to take into account when you start stretching the legs of a rifle with an LPVO, like a 1-to-8, you start shooting 300, 400, 500 yards, and you start really aggressively canting that rifle, you are going to see a drastic shift in your point of aim versus the point of impact. So why do we want taller optic mounts like this on our rifles? Before we get into the two that I've been testing for a long time, that's because it's going to be more comfortable for you, right? You're going to be able to last longer out there on the range or on an operation. We're just doing drill after drill after drill, or you've got to keep that rifle up here. It's a lot easier to stay here than it is to have to crunch in real crazy and bring that really low red dot mount into your view to engage the target. So that's a massive positive. Now, when it comes to ones that have like a diving board or an extension for your night vision devices, your lasers, or whatever else you want to put up there, it frees up a lot of rail space back here. Yes, you will have some shadowing with your IR illuminator, but typically you can overcome that with hand placement. But thinking about freeing up some of that rail space when you have a light, you've got a front sight, you've got pressure pads up here, you've got whatever else going on with that rail, especially when it comes to short barrel rifles, you know, that 10.5, 11.5, 12.5, those are super popular. When you start freeing up some of that rail space, not only for your hand, but all of your devices, that is a huge level up than having to grab this rifle by some kind of lower grip like they used to do in the 90s, which almost nobody does anymore, or have a funky hand position because you've got too much stuff on the end of that rifle. That is probably the biggest positive that I can think of, is freeing up space and then keeping yourself in the game a little bit longer because you're more comfortable. And then of course, the biggest reason of all is because it's what all the cool guys are using and it just looks cool. No, all joking aside. So let's talk about the two that I've been running out here. And I've run several others. These are just two that I really like. And I think that come in at a price point that most of us out there can live with. The first one we'll start with is the Cliffhang IR, or the Cliffhanger from Noise Fighters. So this isn't per se a new design. It's just basically an elevated pick rail at 0.83. So whatever your optic height is, or whatever you're putting on there, just add 0.83 to it, and that's going to give you your measurement of height. But the cool thing with a design like this is, say you have a magnifier, you've got a new end gall, you've got whatever it is, you've got your optic, you can raise all of that stuff up at the same time without having to mix and match different mounts or go with different things, because it's just a complete pick rail system that goes over. This thing is coming in, I want to say, right at like 159 to like 189 bucks, which I think is a price point that all of us can live with to get all of our stuff elevated and up where we want it. The only thing you need to take into account is, depending on the size of your night vision device, you may or may not be able to get your magnifier on there if you're running a smaller red dot or something like an EOTech. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. As far as the force delivery that this thing can take, when I reached out to noise fighters after running this and asked them, they said it would take around 400 to 500 pounds of force to actually destroy and bend this mount, which I thought was pretty cool, and definitely probably not an amount of force I'm going to put on this rifle, especially on the end, but it's good to know that it can take a definite beating out there. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is the JagerWorks A1 mount. And this one's a little bit newer to me, but I've run it for probably about a year-ish now, maybe a little less. But it's hands down a great option because you can build it in stages. If you know you're going to get into the night game or you need that dive board mount, you can buy that later and just start with the mount up front. The great thing about the JagerWorks mount is you can buy the mount for whatever aim point, MRO, EOTech. They have all those different versions for you. And the mount costs about 180 bucks. So you can get out there, start working your rifle, and then when you step into the night vision game or whatever you need that diving board up front for, you can buy the actual dovetail mount for it, either direct for a D-ball or just QD rail or pick rail for a QD mount. And you can put whatever night vision device you want on there, and that's about an additional 90 bucks. So a little bit more expensive. You're around that $270 mark, but these mounts have been out for a long time. I've got a lot of friends using these things. They are extremely strong, and the dovetail interface between the main mount and your accessory mount for your night vision or whatever you want to put on there is what I say is kind of at that higher point of moderately priced, but still affordable for most of us out there that are required to buy all of our own gear. All right, guys, I hope that helped you out and gave you a couple of options if you're looking to raise the height of your red dot, get into the night game without breaking the bank or spending $500 on the mount alone. There's a lot of other options out there. These are just two that are in my collection that I've been using for some time. Make sure you get subscribed to the channel. Check out ironinfidel.com for all that fitness gear. Of course, the battle bottles, tried and true. Staying healthy, staying hydrated. I will see you guys in the next one.